Blessings and welcome back to our 27th episode in our journey through the zodiacal faces. I'm Elsa and I'm joined today by brilliant astrologers KD Dayton and David Fisher. Thanks for being here, both of you, once again. And thanks for coming back, Sag. We are on our third and final decan of Sagittarius. And the dates for this decan are December 11th or 12th through December 20th or 21st, depending on where you're at. Austin Coppock calls this a horse's skull. So I guess we're seeing that equine type of like horse vibe, but I think the skull is a little ode to Saturn being the decan lord or the co-lord to Jupiter. So we've got Jupiter, of course, being represented by the Temperance card for all of Sagittarius. And then we've got Saturn, the other outermost planet, being its, co-lord, or how, I think sometimes I call it sublord, but, kind of answering to Jupiter, or kind of coloring Jupiter's tasks here with the Saturnine face. So then T. Susan Chang calls this the weight of the world. And we've got the Hermetic deck or the Minor Arcana card calling this the Lord of Oppression or the 10 of Wands. So that kind of sets us up a little bit for today. Do you guys have any notes straight out of the gate that you want people to keep in mind when we're thinking about this decan before I get into Austin's notes from 36 Spaces?
I actually think that this might be pertinent for anything you have to speak about today, David, actually, which is that another ruler of this decan by a different schema, the triplicity schema, is the sun. So it's going to be really interesting, I think, in some of the images that we see of this decan. The sun is an alternate ruler of this sub period of Sagittarius.
I found that really interesting too. And, I always look at the triplicity ruler, and sometimes we've noted it here, sometimes we haven't noted it, just to, keep on track and not confuse people or whatever. But it is very interesting, Saturn and the sun, because we think of them as dynamic opposites, but it would be very interesting to think of the 10 of Wands as the sun, right? And the Lord of Oppression as the sun, because if you think of like Jupiter and the sun together, you think like day team and kings and royalty and all of that. So for me, it does make sense with Saturn kind of giving the weight and the oppressive vibe of the 10 of Wands. But then again, when you think Wands, you think fire and, kind of like passion and prominence and things like this, which is also like a Jupiterian sun-like dynamic. So it is interesting to note the co-ruler. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, what I was going to say about it is that we are getting to the end of another sign. And every time we get to the end of a sign, we see kind of the degenerate qualities of that sign coming into play. In the first decans, we have observed through this journey that we experience a newness to that particular experience, where it's like, I have to get used to it in a certain way. In the middle of the decans, in the second decan of each sign, you get the stable energy of that sign. In the third decan, you kind of get the degenerate energy of that sign. Here in another fire sign, we had in Aries Venus, which is an ability. We had in Leo Mars, which is a malefic, and and has no particular dignity in fire signs other than decan in Leo. And now we have Saturn, which has some triplicity rulership over fire signs, which is why I believe this is not a total like waste of time kind of card, a total difficulty kind of card. I think it's more difficult to go, for instance, through a 10 of Swords than through a 10 of Wands. In my experience, this is the way I think about it. But the degenerate quality that I wanted to talk about is Saturn comes to show us that no matter how much you're willing to do something, time always gets around to you and limits the limits to your resources also limit your capacity to do things. And this is like Whereas in Aries, you get, I want to do it all because I can do it all, because I have it all, because I have all the people necessary, because I have all the contact. Here we see that even though you can have all that, what if that is still not enough, right? And so we're going to talk about that a little more. We're going to explore that deeper a little bit more, but it's something that you still have to have faith in a way, but to leave things behind. But we're going to get more into that.
It really correlates to the solstice moment that we're at. No matter which hemisphere you're at, it's coming to that pinnacle of something. In the north, it's of the dark, in the south is of the light. And that is such a precarious moment, and exactly what you were just talking about.
It's interesting to think about as well, the sun and Saturn being the co-lords to this. And in one place we have like the pinnacle of darkness and the shift of light to dark, and then opposite in the southern hemisphere, the shift of dark to light. Wait, did I say that already? Light to dark. Anyway, with the, yeah, I got it. Okay. So just thinking about that is the flip of the shift from, passing the torch from the darkest part to the lightest part, and vice versa, I guess, with the sun and Saturn being right here at that, moment. It does make sense that we could have those two very different lords still representing the passing of the torch in that way. And David, yeah, a few things that you said, Austin will go on to say in so many words in 36 secrets or 36 faces as well. I'm going to read a little bit more directly this time. A lot of times I just kind of like make little highlights or little notes as I am going through, but there's a few things that I might try to directly from. So in the second decan, we've seen like this heroic unification in the face of adversity, right? So you're like on this journey, right? The third shows a necessary separation again. So you're going to see how, what David was saying and what we've mirrored in other decans about this. I think it was in Scorpio where we were talking about the tantric union and then the separation and longing for that union. Here, he talks again about the necessity to separation, and it points towards circumstances in which the vehicle must be sacrificed in order to achieve the will. So now you're kind of talking about, the rider and horse coming together as one, or representing spirit and matter. And now you're kind of having to drop the vehicle or drop the tool just to move towards will alone. So in this decan, he talks about the horse is being ridden until collapse, where Saturn brings limitations to the surface. So you're seeing like where your limitations in the journey kind of fall out, like where the rubber hits the road kind of a thing. So there's an exhaustion here, but also satisfaction as well. So it's like he likens it to the last mile of a marathon, where sweat and exhaustion mingle with the taste of victory. In the 36 Airs of the Zodiac, as we know, this is the Hellenistic fragmentary text that we've mentioned and that Austin clips in his book. It's referred to as the goddess Ananke. So as we know, Ananke in, even in astrology refers to necessity. And it's like a primordial power. She's this goddess of fate that was present at the beginning of the universe. And as I read through this story, I just want people to keep in mind that if you're coming from the like Hindu tradition or mythology, this is very much like Kali or Shakti, and the story that we have of Kali and time. Her sort of servant is time. So she emerged at the beginning. This is an Anke. She's self-created and intertwined with her serpentine or serpent-like consort Chronos or time. Together, the two are wrapped around this primordial egg of matter, and through their constrictions, differentiated it into land and sea and air. Ananke is the source of all the world's compulsions, necessities, and inevitabilities. So with her consort Chronos, she's like the lady of all cycles on heaven and on earth. So she's neither kind nor cruel. She presides over what must be done. So creation itself is her child. And again, the reason why I'm like reading this entire thing is because we get a lot of this universe card or the world card when we're looking at the card for Saturn here. the major arcana for Saturn. Creation itself is her child, composed of like her nature and subject to her laws. So just kind of like how nature is like giving and breathing and cruel, and all these things like are kind of built into the law of nature.
And not only that, but how Saturn also used to govern the golden era before Jupiter assumed control by dismembering him. Saturn didn't die. He's a Titan. He can't die. So he was dismembered and incapacitated, which means there is an overpowering, consciousness kind of overpowered nature in a way when the human being learned to manipulate the element extent that it made us kind of invulnerable to nature, quote unquote. We are not invulnerable to nature, but in an ideal way. And so Saturn is always there limiting us. Nature is always there limiting us, meaning that we cannot escape Jupiter's like what you must be in this particular realm, in this particular structure to be supported in this reality on Earth. And this is the reality of Jupiter. It's limited by Saturn. Saturn is the only one that can give us unlimited perspective and success in a way, because it's the only one that if you're in communion with it, you're kind of in total communion with the rhythms of the Earth itself. But Jupiter is more on the ideal realm, which is where our society stands nowadays. We're more idealized. We're more living in a idealized state, to sum up. And so what I feel like the idea of this Decan brings is that there is a limit to whatever gives us hope. There is a limit to whatever gives us, that fire to our spirit. And if we won't let it die, it will still come to a halt. We will still face a moment of divergence, from circumstance where we feel like that's too heavy to keep carrying and we will not be able to continue. And that's a limitation that we face in circumstance. And so temperance will come in later in that context as well, but I'll leave that for later.
Yeah, I like that because T-Susan Chang talks a little bit about that in her book. Are you going to like take those 10 like bundles with this man hunched over this big bundle of sticks and cast it behind you and just sort of let all this hard work go, like just like let it go? Or are you going to cast it in front of you, sort of stumbling over it? Which again, I think we can.
I just want to say something like so interesting, not necessarily related to any of the texts that we're talking about, but something that I hear anecdotally a lot when people are talking about the past and they're talking about maybe theoretically the primes of their life, and they call it the golden years, the golden era. And there's something about Saturn, which is the past and the passage of time, and the sun that really it's like the sun has diminished in opposition to Saturn, and is recalling a golden time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that, because it's like your ancestral thing. It's like in the land, it's in the ancestors.
Yeah.
And we also just had the moon, which definitely has to do with like reminiscing about the past and like memories of the past. So it's like you're creating those memories when you're out on a journey, right? And then you like reflect back at those, usually with more of a lustful gaze, let's say, or we reflect back on them more positively, right? Which I think is a very Jupiterian thing. So that's kind of the part of like remembering stuff that Jupiter remembers. Like you're like, oh my God, like when you're like traveling, sometimes like you're in the airport and it's like terrible and there's all these terrible moments. But then when you think about them, you're like, oh, you just think about like laughing with your friends at like how terrible it was. You don't really, you just get good vibes from it. So it's like, I think
we call this type 2 fun, where it's really fun way afterwards but not fun during it. That is a very Jupiter Sagittarian type fun, right?
Yeah, like creating memories of these big like journeys and telling tall tales and things like that. And once you get to that Saturn time, it's like when you are limited and you're in responsibility and you're having to like give up all of this past, like I think that's where Jupiter could come in and kind of like be like positive, like look at all we built and like look at the fun memories we made on that like, you know, wild journey. So, okay. Austin goes on to say that those who would walk the terrain of this face must become priests and priestesses of the ancient goddess, you know, referring to Ananke or Kali. For it is here that it becomes clear what must be done. Necessity's trials are twofold. So for those natives that are listening, you might, I've said this before, but Austin gives meanings for each of the planets. When we're looking at this, we're looking at it as an archetype, or maybe maybe if your sun is here, but the planets are all gonna have their own like individual way of acting here. But anyway, as we move through this 10-day moment, or if you do have some planets here, maybe this will help you as we look at necessity's trials and them being twofold. So Austin lays it out as this. The first of the twofold necessities are those whose ordeals we choose to take on. So we set a goal and we follow it through to the end, and this would be sacred to necessity, the goddess Ananke. To set something, and this is very Saturnine, right? To set a goal and follow it through to the end, which is very difficult and very Saturnine, but this is like an offering that you could give, and a offering of a trial that you put yourself through. Yet not all such limitations are chosen, and these comprise the second category. Life does not always offer us choices, and it is at those places that where that crossroad hits, or where that road narrows, that necessity's trials become clear. We can press on and do what we must, or we can abandon the path. And so this is that second choice, when we don't set a goal and choose it, when we are faced with oppression or obstacles. So these are like initiations, I guess, into the mystery that, you know, and if you think about the outer planets, right, you think about Saturn and Jupiter together, it's very much being initiated into the mystery, like for better or worse, you know. So you can also think of like, if we aim at the first part of Sagittarius, and then the arrow flies on its journey at the second part of Sagittarius, here we get that final kaplunk. Like hopefully it's the bullseye, but here we're like hitting that target, and we're faced with kind of like the finality of where the arrow hits. Like now we know like where our arrow hit. Did it hit the bullseye? Did it hit the mark? And you know, there's sacrifice in this. So, and I think sacrifice here tells a lot. So like when you think about like religion, and I'm taking this Jupiterian stance, right? Like religion asks you to like sacrifice certain things and like stay on the straight and narrow, like whatever that means for you, right? Or maybe you're making offerings, you don't call it a sacrifice, like, but a lot of like monotheistic traditions have people, you know, living on some kind of a, you know, path, a particular path in order to achieve something. So that's where I think that Saturnine, and even solar, if you wanted to take in the sun, but that Saturn and Jupiter dynamic happens, is where you're narrowing the path and you're making a sacrifice, and it might be difficult, but hopefully worth it. You're building towards something. But then Austin goes on to say that these this is where the circumstances, where the body and the spirit are at odds, because to move forward, the spirit and the will must press the body beyond its comfort zone. So the hard pathways, I guess, of this faith are littered with desperate and brave and heroic acts, where you're going above and beyond where you thought the journey would ever take you, and above and beyond where you think that you or your body can go. So in conclusion, Austin says those who walk this face must choose which burdens they're going to bear until the bitter end, and which are not worthy of such feats of will and endurance. So there's like a wisdom choice, a narrowing of choice that happens. So the narrowing being Saturn and the wisdom being Jupiter. So I guess that's the wisdom, is if we're going to, you know, thrash something out till the very end, what's worth doing that for, I guess, or like what sacrifices are necessary, and for what?
I think this is a good part to get in with the Picatrix and then migrate to what Thesis and Chang has to say with the tarot, because it's all very linked and it's going to be very well depicted by what the tarot has to say. So what I want to talk about sacrifice-wise is there rises in the third phase of Sagittarius, according to the Picatrix, a man with a cap on his head who's murdering another man. This phase is of evil desires, adverse and evil effects, and fickleness in these and fickleness in these, and evil wishes, hatred, dispersion, and evil conduct. This is its form. So we're talking about sacrifices here, and it doesn't have to be literally like only men murdering each other and violence like that, but it could be also a phase of, it came into my mind as you were speaking, Elsa, murdering a side of you, much like the Three of Swords requires us to murder one aspect of the idealization that we had, or murder one aspect of the idealization that we had in order to move forward. In here, we feel like we have to give up on something, but it's not so much an ideal as it is like circumstance telling you, yes, you might be right. Yes, this might be righteous in a way, but you don't get to do it anyway, regardless. Your time is up. It's not enough resources. It's not enough energy. There's not enough, basically.
Or tapping into the well of when you think there's not enough and like pushing through anyways.
And so again, you get into that idea of survival of the fittest. Again, that Saturnine idea of there are limitations, and if you are to survive, you have to prioritize. This is the Capricorn lesson side of Saturn. So yeah, I like. Yeah.
Go ahead. So you like.
I like how this is a good segue into the Temperance as well, and other archetypes that we're going to see into tarot.
Yeah, completely. And I think, you know, anytime, and just to, you know, ease the minds of people who listen to the Picatrix, I mean, anytime you get Saturn in the Picatrix, you get evil and murder and like things like this, right? So don't trip. But it is, you know, I think about this too, where there's like, you know, these personal trainers of these people that like do, I'm thinking of David Goggins. I don't know if anyone follows him, but he, and like people like Joe Rogan, and I think I've mentioned that before, about like David was saying about like murdering like a part of yourself or whatever. I guess we wouldn't have to say murder, but we could say like the part of yourself that doesn't want to go out and work out, or doesn't want to go out into the cold and do the thing, or doesn't want to go to work, or doesn't want to get up and go to school, or doesn't want to, you're like, oh man, I've had like such a long week, I don't think I can do another day, but you tell that part to shut up and you do another day or whatever, you know, like that's like, you know, not the nurturing Cancer part of like taking love and self-care. That's the part that Saturn is like, I don't care what my body's telling me, I'm going to finish the race, or I'm going to get up and do the hard thing. So you know, and that's a little Jupiterian too when it comes to ideas and values and religion. It's
like going towards victory at all costs, you know, like dissociating almost from the body, which are things that are represented by the moon and the sun.
And Saturn asks us to, you know, rebel against those things. And like Jupiter, of course, is like eating, drinking, feasting, and be merry and all of those things. But yeah, Saturn says, okay, you get that after you cross the finish line of this hard like thing or whatever, you know?
Right.
So it's like victory and burden. Like, you know, anything that's worth fighting for is going to be like hard to get or whatever, you know, that kind of like concept of, you know, you might want to do the thing. Like, I'm just thinking like in a kind of Christian paradigm or in a religious paradigm, it's like you might have like lust, but you're not supposed to follow that, or you might, so you might have desires, or you might have this or that, but you're supposed to stay on this like certain, thing.
Yeah.
So despite what you feel or despite what you think is good, like do what God says, not what you want or whatever, So that's kind of like the Jupiterian Saturnine kind of like play of like what we want. And then, also Saturn says you can have the feast and you can have the victory and all of that if you stay on the, if you deny it for a certain amount of time, or if you stay harshly
like that's
on
what Lent is, right? And
Yes.
this really makes me think of something, and I'm going to try to tie it together eloquently. David, welcome back. Is that sugar. Sugar is a very interesting commodity in the world, and at least in the US at this time of year around Christmas, it's a very proliferous item. There's a lot of cookies, baked goods, things going around as North America heads into winter and everything. Sugar is an indulgence. It's a sweetness. It's something that we can be addicted to. It's something that is also fought wars over. People fight wars over it, control of it. It's a commodity, as in a trade asset. It can be converted into wealth, or it could be maybe not nourishment. We know now it's not great for us, but it is something that we can live off of.
Yeah,
So,
and when you say we've had wars over sugar. If you've ever tried to quit sugar, you know what that own little personal war might be like, right?
absolutely.
And it
But
can
it's
be
like
very
micro and macro. Yeah.
And not only wars over sugar. If you look at Brazil's history, for instance, you have a history with slavery where hundreds of thousands of enslaved individuals died in the plantations of sugarcane here in Brazil. And sugar is still a commodity that is spinning Brazilian economy a lot. So there's a lot of death involved. It's not just of the wars that were fought over it because people were trying to dominate the market. It was also the people who died trying to produce it and trying to keep up that market without, getting paid for it.
It's interesting. I know like sweet. I'm sorry, David. And it's interesting because I know that like sweets or whatever are like a Venus thing or a moon thing or whatever, but also Jupiter, to me, it could be a metaphor for Jupiter, right? Like of the feast and the abundance and the heart, the sweetness of like the greater benefic, like fats and sweets and,
it's something that can be produced in abundance. The circumstance provides you with the way to produce it in abundance in the case of the last few centuries. And it's something that is like the old oil, before people discovered oil, sugarcane was really the thing that was spinning the economy worldwide.
Yeah,
so
and also it
becomes tiring at some point, right? With a 10 of wands, there's limits.
Exactly.
Like if you only had sugar to eat, you would be like sick. And then you think of like Saturn, which is bones and especially teeth, and how like sugar will like rot your teeth if you have too much or something like this. But also we do need a certain amount of sugars for electrolytes and stuff like that. So I guess you get that temperance, that again, like striving for balance or like the mixing of the worlds with like trying to find that sweet spot between Saturn and Jupiter here.
Let's bring up the tarot cards then.
Yeah, and I just I'm just gonna say like one more thing just about like the idea of Saturn and Jupiter together being like this bittersweet, like it can be like a bittersweet victory, right? So it's like, sometimes all you've had to give up to get to your goal, you still get your goal, but you've had to give up so much and it's so tiring or something like this, that it's this bittersweet victory, and I think that's the Lord of Oppression, right? That's the 10 of Wands, or like the idea that like even sugar, right, can oppress us and oppress our body and oppress our immune system if we have too much or something like this. It's an oppressive weight if not dealt with, but also does serve to have like victory or potential on some level as well.
I completely agree. This was definitely a spur of the moment discussion, but all these things somehow are like tying back in my mind around the topic of sugar. So
yeah, it works.
Somehow, yeah. Okay, so we have the three cards that Elsa mentioned at the beginning, which are Temperance for the sign of Sagittarius, the World for the co-ruler of this decan, Saturn, and the Ten of Wands is the Lord of Oppression. So on the slide you see on your screen now, we have a few examples of Temperance, which we've seen Temperance cards all throughout Sagittarius, the first, second decan, and now I have a couple of cards aside from the Rider-Waite Smith one on the left. I think we've not seen these others before. I brought up the Temperance card in the middle, which is of the Botticelli Renaissance deck, because of the golden atmosphere around it. We might talk about this a little bit later, or David did make reference to some of it in the images for this decan being very colored by the co-rulership of the sun, in a different mechanism for understanding the rulership of the decans. And the sun is honestly, it's associated with the color gold, so clearly you get that from this. But we also talked about how the sun the sun is naturally associated with leadership and the ruler. And we talked a little bit about the idea of oppression, of authoritarianism, of fascism. We're going to talk about that more when we get to the Ten of Wands cards proper, the minor arcana cards. But I just want to associate, really draw the eye to the association with wealth and this decan specifically. Wealth is not always a good influence. It can be a corrupting influence. And actually, I think we just had that whole conversation with sugar as well, being a very good example of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you hear the classic trope of money is the root of all evil or something like this. And actually, gold is associated with the sun for sure. But gold is also associated with Jupiter because it's associated with royalty and wealth and kings. Even though tin is the magical metal, it's also in many texts gold as well, because you are wrapped in gold and you're wrapped in the purple and blues and things like this.
Susan Chang says in her chapter that Saturn can be.
I was about to say that. So no, I've always used, so that's what I was about to say, is that Saturn also is associated with gold. So you have lead most of the time as a magical, ruler for Saturn because of its heaviness and its sort of lowly quality. But we know Saturn was considered the golden age, right? And Saturn is also wealth, and especially the corrupting and miserly part of wealth. Yes. And the sort of digging underground for gold and hoarding gold and dragons hoarding gold and things like that. So gold is absolutely used for Saturn in a lot of ways, in a Saturn Sun dynamic and representing the wealth of Saturn. So it's interesting how we've got all three of them being associated with gold here as the outer planets and as the luminary that represents the day team. So I think just to point out, if we haven't already, Saturn and Jupiter are both on the day team, and the day team is ruled by the sun, which is gold, and they both are the outer planets representing longevity and wealth and progeny and things like that as well. So good point. Yep.
Day, all about it. It's all about that masculine exerting energy, however you want to parse it, that's a part of this decan. And then on the far right, we have, I love this deck. It's funny sometimes, but also sometimes it's poignant. The Cat Tarot deck. In this card of Temperance, what I find really interesting is that this cat is lapping the water out of a fishbowl, but he's not actually eating the fish. And it's he has the highest aspirations, the highest dreams of, capturing the prey, capturing the fish, but he's just taking a little bit. He's enjoying the balance that has been accomplished between the survival of these two pets, somebody's cat, somebody's fish. And that's a real lovely form of temperance. And also the cat is animal of Saturn. So
what I like about the Temperance card in relation to this decan is that the sun and Saturn, as you guys were mentioning also, are polar opposites. You guys are kind of circling around that. They're polar opposites, and they have this energy of when you get too much of one, the remedy, the balance, the tempering side is to get the positive side of the other, try and balance that out. So if you're getting too much of the sun, too much individuality, maybe you want to start looking at the things that you're neglecting in the collective, right? In order to get a little bit of balance, and so forth. But just that movement of the cups of the temperance card being depicted by this dance of Sun and Saturn, and how that really gives us a perspective of what's truly valuable in life. The mutability of circumstance really brings us, and the death of things really brings us to contemplate again what is really valuable to us in sight of what we can achieve. Again, you're doing something because you can with the fire suit of wands, but with the temperance card, you want to learn when to kind of retreat that action and to be like, okay, it's time to let go, which is the lesson of the 10 of Wands.
Yeah, and I think that going back to what we talked about with the temperance card is, remember how we were talking about, oh, it's balance, and like once you temper the wine, you can't take the water back out of the wine and all this stuff. But we learned in the first part of this Sagittarius Decan that we're actually, you know, bringing to extremes. So that's what you have here as well, like the extreme of Sun and Saturn and the extreme part of the solstices, which is like really long days or really short days, and you're kind of like bringing them together, and it's where they meet. And we talked about that being part of like the idea of temperance, is bringing together like polar opposites or extremes or something like this. And we do see that kind of being a part of the day team, right? Or the outer planets of like, what is really important, what's worth striving for, what's worth sacrificing for. And then also the day team or the outer planets, and their ability to rise to power and kingliness and things like that, and how those things we know, like wealth, like Katie was saying, wealth or sugar, or the ability to be kings, or the ability to be like owning a bunch of land or things like this. These are all Jupiterian or Saturn like possibilities, and how it can be very oppressive.
Very much so. I love that. Should I move on to the world? Our next card? Okay, so next we have the world, which we have seen before. This is the card of Saturn, and I can't remember off the top of my head which decans we've seen it in. I want to say there was one in Taurus, one in Leo, and one in Libra, I believe. Anyway,
Perfect.
Hey, yay.
Yes.
My memory is good. Saturn. So Saturn as a planet, as well as the card, the world, do represent some very similar things, like long spans of time, as well as enclosure, because you see the ovum in the far left. We have the Rider-Waite-Smith card, the ovum, or the wreath that delineates, sort of designates a boundary of some sort. And in the middle card, which I don't believe I have shown before in our recordings about the world, is the Russian tarot deck. And what I really love about this depiction of the world is that there is space in the background. It's happening from the perspective of someone that is off of Earth and is looking down on the planet itself. And I always try to remind people that when you're thinking of what Saturn means, you have to remember that in ancient times, Saturn was the planet that you could see that was the furthest away in actuality. So it does mean the limit of what we could see, the limit of what we could know, the limit of the solar system as far as the ancients were concerned. And I
in
think
other words, the limits of consciousness.
Precisely, the limits of consciousness. It's a poignant one, you know, here in the Russian tarot deck. So what I really wanted to bring up about the world cards here. Oh, also we have on the far right the Mother Peace deck. I've shown this card before, but just as a reminder, it's a depiction of the Maya Shakti. So Saturn being the passage of time and the Lord of time, you know, both destruction and birth, like chaos, and the natural progression of things. you have a very, it's very mystical in some ways, but it's also very routine. It's also very solid. You can be assured that things that are born will decay. And that's a very important part of the world card and our understanding of Saturn.
And every day you have to make those choices of, oh, okay, this is too burdening for me right now, because even though it is an action that I've been taking for a long time, it's not sustainable now within the context that I find myself in. And it's not that it can't be a part of that context. It's just that you're like, oh, now that I stop to think of it, I cannot I can choose not to prioritize it anymore and just leave it in the background, and it will just recede. This is the mutability part of Sagittarius here. And again, that kind of the degenerate part of the last decan of each sign, especially in this one, as Elsa said, in the solstitial point, and being a fire sign and being in a transition to from a mutable sign.
Mutable to cardinal, which is really a different energy when you think about it, because a mutable sign has a lot of trouble exerting its energy externally because of influences from outside, but a cardinal sign is able to generate those influences internally and propel them outwards. It's very, very different what we're going into, again, into a Saturn ruled sign of Capricorn.
That's what I was going to bring up, is that we've got the world Saturn as represented by the world card here at the very last decan of this like moment of shifting from the, you know, dark to the light. But then we're going to take this world card and make it the primary ruler in the next decan. So it's going to come to its like full capacity, where we learn a lot more lessons about it as like a main lord of the sign of Capricorn. So, you know, this is, if you're, you know, wanting more world, you were about to get it for 3 decans as the main lord.
I hope you guys are ready for it.
More than 3, 6, because Capricorn and Aquarius come one right after another. So we are in Saturn season. Welcome everyone. Welcome.
Well, we got, you know, and we've got these, you know, we've got these moments, like even at the solstice, a lot of people are celebrating Christmas, and it's the middle of the winter, so it's like very dark and the days are short, and we've got these feasts, but we've also got these challenges of like, you know, emotional challenges, or spending a lot of money, or a lot of gifting, a lot of eating, but also a lot of darkness and retreating at this time of year. So it is really kind of beautiful and complicated, and we will
just like Saturn.
Yes.
So the one quote that I want to read before we go on to the 10 of Wands, which is the minor arcana card, Lord of Oppression, is one that Susan Chang poses in her chapter on this in her book 36 Secrets, this decan, which she asks, what happens when you try to carry the weight of the world on a long distance hike? It's pretty heavy.
And we all know what it's like to pack a backpack for a big hike. It's like you try to get it as light as possible, and it's a brick, and you're just like, what did I need all this stuff for? And again, like David was talking about prioritizing. And when you're faced with death, the Lord of Death, or the bigness of the world, or something like this, which I think both Jupiter and Saturn have, is that sort of bigness that David was talking about, like what's priority. You quickly realize when you're taking a hike, like, what do I even need all this stuff for?
Well, again, you only realize the weight of your choices when the consequences come, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And
so here in Sagittarius 3, I feel like the consequences are showing up in a way that's making you prioritize.
Well, yes, and when we think about weight, actually, we can think about Jupiter, because Jupiter is like the weight of the body, or being like Santa Claus-like, or round, or having weight, or having.
But it's also long distances. Sagittarius is long distances and foreign travel.
Absolutely. So when you're thinking about weight, you're looking at the consequences of what that long journey means, what the weight of the world on your shoulders, the weight in your body, the sugar, all the things. And just before we, you know, just to, as a segue, I guess, is we've got the Lord of Oppression as coming up with the 10 of Wands. But just to remind you, the universe card, or the world card, is called the Great One of the Night of Time. So again, we have darkness and time being kind of exposed in that Saturn-like quality. So, all right, the Lord of Oppression, the Ten of Wands.
Oppression. This is such a interesting card. I have gained a new appreciation for it, and actually of the whole suite of wands from reading Chang's chapter in 36 Secrets about this specific card. So she says that wands are a story of conquest, and that there is inevitably going to be a very charismatic ending, you know, the ending being the 10, the last card of the number suite of wands. So while there are a lot of negative ways that the suite of wands can fan out, clearly this person is struggling very hard. For some reason, putting his face into a bundle of sticks, that doesn't seem very effective. This is not an effective way to carry a bundle of sticks if you're trying to do it. This is not a comfortable situation this person seems to be in. But regardless of that, there is an association with this Decan of being immortalized into song and story. A sort of association with being legendary. And that's that combination of Jupiter and Saturn. Those are two outer moving planets that are very you know, in addition to being slow, they're also very prominent and powerful in their influences. And so that's what we have here in this Decan is somebody that is able to do Jupiter things, go long distances, see large expanses, also take on great endeavors with Saturn, which is the pressure, the enclosure, and the long time that they're able to do that.
I love that you bring this up because Elsa, Matt, and I were bringing something like that up in our previous study group relating to the 10th and the 11th houses. I don't remember exactly where we brought this up, but it was about the professions attributed to or skills attributed to the 10th house and the planets that ruled that house or inhabited that house, and how to manifest it in a native's life. And we were talking about how the sources were only telling you that Venus, Mercury, and Mars could give you significations for particular skills that you could learn and pass on. But the other planets kind of were a little bit different. The luminaries were something in particular, but the outer planets, Jupiter and Saturn, I imagine that it is exactly about what you're saying, like this pertaining to this more social context, right? Where you manage a lot of people. For instance, we had one of our participants in the study group that had Saturn ruled by Jupiter in the 10th, and they actually managed a lot, hundreds of people throughout their career in their jobs. So it's those types of things that you're talking about, being the stuff of legend, or even just being of high rank or high office in whatever you do.
I love that. Also, full disclosure, my natal Saturn is in this Decan. So I'm going to take
I may or may not have a planet here as well.
take all that.
So,
thank you.
Yeah. So, and you know, I also think of like, if you have like all these wands, all this passion, you've got like all this accumulation, right? You've got accumulation of resources, which again is a Saturnine Jupiterian thing where the guy is rich in sticks or rich in staves or whatever. And it's like, you're carrying them all to their final destination in order to like plop them down and like build your structure, or plot, like it's almost like he's carrying, or he's putting his, you know, good foot forward or something, or like really bearing into this project because it's somehow worth it. He's collected all these things in order to like make, you know, had gathered this wealth and like make this fire, build this house, or like whatever it is. So I do see like some wealth possibilities. And if you think about like, you know, he's taking all these things home from his journey in order to like have this wealth accumulation or build this home or like do this thing, it's like, it's very hard and very difficult at the end to like get all those things there. And maybe it is oppressive. Like it can be oppressive to even like go out on a big journey and have to come home and like build anew or something like this, but it's worth it because you have all these resources. And you kind of see that too on the 10 of Wands with the Scapini deck. You see this like long and winding road or whatever,
And you know what's happening in this card, which I really wanted to bring up immediately when you started talking about that, this last piece, is you see two merchants at the top of the card on the road winding through, and they are about to be robbed by bandits. Okay, this is a group of people who are looking to steal and rob someone. All right, that is it's a little saturnine, you know, to be taking from someone and to be conducting illegal and subversive activity like that. But yeah, it's like you do what you have to do to survive.
And again,
Yeah.
when you think about a company, for instance, how many companies have been lasting for decades, and people thought that they would last forever, like BlackBerry, I don't know, or whatever, and they would be the main event for their niche or whatever. But then circumstance comes along, something better comes along, or just the market crashes or anything like that, and you get robbed of all that momentum that you thought you had. And so I think that this Capini deck really represents that kind of energy in life.
And on that same
Ten of
note, I
Wands.
mean, we think of like Mercury as thief or something, but if you're thieving out of necessity, then you get back to that necessity piece, which is Saturn. So like, you could say the same thing about companies, right? Like even whether they fail or whether whatever, you think of like the longevity of certain brands like that have like international status and stuff like this, and just how corrupt they are. I'm thinking of like even like Coca-Cola with like sugar, or like just how much necessity pushed them to like nefarious means. So it's like, yes, the whole entire globe knows your name, and you have success beyond compare, which is this Jupiterian thing, which is like global, right? When you think about like every country and big expanses, they know your name, and branding and being able to hand down from generation to generation to generation this business. But we think of them as like extremely nefarious most of the time. Like we like them, we use them, we participate, but at the same time, we sort of loathe their because they've had to do like all this nefarious things to get their success, like, you know, cutting down their rainforest or taking advantage of people and water supply and like all these things. So it is a very interesting,
hiding in the shadows, sort of as Saturn does, right?
Yes. So, and just being sort of on the outskirts of society, but at the same time being like very successful in it. So yeah,
okay.
Okay.
That's a very good depiction, I feel like, of the Ten of Wands. I want to talk briefly about the science deck, because we always love it so much, and I want to read this description of the supernova. But before I do, just to mention, we did talk about earlier, want to bring it up again, that one of the things associated with the Ten of Wands and this decan in particular is authoritarianism and is fascism specifically. In her book about this decan, T. Susan Chang references how etymologically the word fascism shares a root with this card, and that fascis, the Latin word, means a bundle of sticks. And it's a very poignant, I encourage everyone who has it to reread this chapter and think a little bit more about it. It's a very poignant way that she explains it. But in the science deck, this decan, this card, the Ten of Wands, is depicted as the supernova. And I'm going to read what it says here. A massive star in midlife generates tremendous energy through nuclear fusion, transforming hydrogen and helium into elements as heavy as iron. When its fuel burns away and its structure grows unstable, the star may finally explode, sending vast amounts of light and material into space. The heavier elements we know on Earth, metals like gold and silver, as well as elements critical to living things, are generated in this type of cataclysmic event, a supernova. All the heavier elements on Earth and in the universe are generated in these supremely powerful explosions. A human being delivers a lifetime's energy into the world, a lasting, fruitful gesture of a creative life, work that draws material from the world and returns it transformed. This card marks the culmination of achievement where our efforts give back to the world something precious.
That's beautiful. And that's like so like science deck. You never cease to amaze us, because you got this like big again, you're talking about the outer planets. And where does the supernova happen? It happens in the darkness and the vastness of space, which is like kind of a Saturn thing, like black holes and like all the space that we can't see is Saturn. And then all the particulates of like stars and supernovas and things like this. This is definitely like a Jupiterian thing, like something, you know, being given from nothing, essentially. So I guess like something being given from nothing is very much Jupiter and Saturn, right?
Totally. Totally.
I love how it mentions lead as well.
Oh, me too. Me too. It's so mystical. You know, some of these things that we often think about as rudimentary, very cut and dry. In the science deck, they are made mystical once more. So in the Mother Peace deck, can't neglect to answer to that beautiful imagery, which is clearly an orgy of some sort or a ritual of some sort where there's tremendous creative energy being expelled. I look at this card, I'm like, oh, it was a crazy full moon on this night. But that's kind of the energy that I get from the Ten of Wands in general. A very like this pinnacle culmination. And, you know, as we talked about, I believe in the last video, the 9 is really the pinnacle and the peak. When we come to the 10, we're looking over the edge of the downfall, or we're looking over the edge of the undoing of that culmination of the suit of element.
Yeah, I get this like ecstatic ritualistic space, almost like this supernova from this image, where it's like an explosion. Because like, I don't know if you guys have ever done something really, 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 really hard and physically demanding where you think you cannot go on. But let's say you're on this long journey, right? And you think you cannot go on and you can't make it one more step and you're not going to make it to the end, but you do. You make it back home, just like the guy that's putting his face forward and he's hunched and he's like right there. He has to drop the stick. So like, oh, he's got to get it to like the home plot, you know. So here it's like they've been on a journey and they think they don't have anything left in them. But when you see your tribe, you've walked down this long path and you see your tribe, they're all there to meet you. You have this extraordinary strength, this like burst of energy, like this hero's journey thing where it's like you think you can't make it, and then you see your people, and then the drumming and the singing, and you have one more night in you. Actually, you have like one more celebration in you. You have like this ecstatic, like you know, out of body kind of experience, which I think, you know, if Jupiter is like the body and like spirituality, and Saturn is sort of like the renunciation of which Jupiter does call for a lot. I mean, religion does call for renunciation a lot of times, right? And then all of a sudden you get this like burst of supernova of energy when you thought that you had been completely depleted, or, you know, and that's kind of the victory moment. That's like the moment where it's like, oh, you know, marathon runners or whatever, they're literally like losing their bowels in the middle of a race and they think they can't go on, and then you're done, and then you're like, whoa, I'm done. Like you have all this extra energy, and then you have all this like celebration moment like this when you know. So this is what I get, is that the tribe has been out, they've exhausted everything and all of their resources, but yet there's a song, but yet there's a celebration, yet there's this ecstatic moment of dance and coming together.
It's so beautiful. I mean, like these depictions are about as varied, I feel like, as I've seen in one minor arcana card, but all really speak to a very similar energy. And you summed it up perfectly, Elsa. Like that's, yeah, that's it. That's it. I do want to read a quote though, from 36 Secrets, because I found this extremely resonant. Again, admitting that I have my Saturn in this Decan natally in my first house, I find this a very poignant description of what this Saturnine energy is like on top of a Jupiter vibe. So she says, you take on another and another, chasing that hit of dopamine from accomplishing them, the gold at the end of temperance's rainbow, only to find yourself depleted at the end of the day, with no sweet downtime as reward. This is known as the workaholics card, also known as the just one more email syndrome.
Yeah, I loved that, and I'm glad you read that, and I can identify with that as well. I'm sure anybody with any placements here can identify with this. And again, it's because of the bigness. It's so much. There's there's an abundance of things to do and the will to sort of like push on despite the needs of the body and things like this. And that's very intense. Like you get the outer planets and the day planets like working together in this way, and it's very intense. It can be productive, right? Because you have Saturn serving Jupiter, so you still get the production, you still get the reward, you still might get the victory, maybe. I mean, maybe if you do the sacrifice and if you do all the things, but not always are you going to get that ecstatic moment that we saw in Mother Peace, right? Like sometimes you're just going to get like, yeah, you made it, like or whatever, you know, like you did the thing.
The participation trophy.
Yeah, and you did the thing. But you know, I think Saturn thrives on that type of satisfaction, right? Of just like following something through to its end or something like this. And you
do
do
it for yourself and to prove to yourself that you can do something. Yes.
And the celebratory nature as well is like you feel that in the world card. You do feel like a bit of a celebration, even though it's about death and letting go and Saturn and the end of a cycle and all of that. There's something celebratory about it.
Totally agree.
Okay, that being said, let's mention a few nativities and then we could ring out with the poem.
And as always, if you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and drop some comments with some emojis down below so we can know that you're loving us and we can love you back.
Love it.
It is our love language. The comment section is the love language for this channel. So drop a world emoji below us. So or get creative with the emojis that you want to leave us for this this sign. And Sagittarius says, we love you. I've really enjoyed going through the Temperance card. It's been a really beautiful journey. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your time with us, Sag. And okay, let's see what we've got for nativities.
One of my favorites that I want to mention off the top is Mayim Bialik, who is our new Jeopardy host. So she's a game show host, Jeopardy right now. That's her most probably prominent role, but she also played Punky Brewster. She's been on multiple TV series, including How I Met Your Mother, and she's a great like actress, but she's also really effing smart. Crazy. She's a doctor.
I'm sorry, I'm out of this.
I also want to mention Taylor Swift, Vanessa Hudgens, Billie Eilish, and Sarah Paulson. Something that's similar between all of them is kind of a dark tone. I know Taylor Swift is kind of wishy-washy and whatever, but she has gone through some transformation in the media already because she has to put up some interpersonal boundaries in a very public way. And that was interesting. So again, referring to that Saturn quality, Vanessa Hudgens also, with her privacy being invaded so much in the High School Musical or post High School Musical period of her life, which was she was involved in some scandals, which is not worth bringing up because it was not even supposed to have been the way it was. It was just because of tabloids really chasing her around.
Scandals, yeah.
Yeah. And you have Billie Eilish, which started her with a very gloomy album about heartbreak. And you have Sarah Paulson, which basically was launched into stardom by American Horror Story, which is, again, Saturnine components of society being
Many of us
brought
considered her very famous before that, but American Horror Story really did solidify her horror creds. And I feel like that's Saturn cred, you know, when you can scare people.
She was acting before that, but she became known worldwide through her roles in American Horror Story. That's undeniable.
Appropriately scary.
Yeah, and you know, we do know that like murder, as astrologers, we know that murder is like a Mars-like thing or whatever. But when you think of horror, you know, a lot of people will think of that Saturn like Reaper, you know, the Reaper type of vibe. And when you think of it, the American Horror Story, like I think like the values, quote unquote, of like America, like land of the free, home of the brave, like the cowboy, and like, you know, I'm not saying that that's like the real, you know, like story. I'm just saying like that kind of like lie or ideal of like what American like vibe is. That's a very Jupiterian thing as well. So like, you know, that that Jupiter, just the American Horror Story, right? It's just got that vibe of like Jupiter, Saturn, just in a title, you know?
Yes.
Mhm.
Truly.
So then we got Brad Pitt, right?
Yes, Brad Pitt. Like, we can't not mention Brad Pitt. And we also can't not mention Steven Spielberg, who is a pretty big cultural force, as well as Samuel fucking L. Jackson. We also have Keith Richards, Christina Aguilera. I don't know if you mentioned her.
Jake Gyllenhaal.
We got some historical people that are pretty significant, like, I don't know, Joseph Stalin, Pope Francis, also born during this Decan. So
both perfect kind of examples. Yeah, Samuel Jackson, Jane Fonda, DMX, Jonah Hill, which I think is interesting. I know this is like super celebrity gossip and like kind of inappropriate or whatever, but he was known for being like kind of around like bigger actor. And he went out on like an interview, not that I keep up much, but he was saying like when he lost weight, like people like didn't like him, or he wasn't getting roles, or he was like criticized for losing weight, which I think is a very Jupiter Saturn thing, right? Is like, you know, being like this lovable like Jupiterian figure, but then like not liked as much when you like lose the weight or something,
or
you know?
or like lose the wealth or something. I feel like there's multiple figures who have this sort of like terrible Jupiter Saturn synastry in their chart with the transits that make it not good.
Yeah, you can see that for sure. Okay, well, thank you, Katie, for preparing the list once again of celebrities, and thanks, Sag, once again for being here for all of the Decans. And we're sad to see you go, but we're very excited for Capricorn season.
Finally.
No, please don't leave. I love you, Sag.
I can't believe we're this far already. So again, drop us like likes and subscribes and all that thing. We're almost to 300. Get us to 300. We do have a little prize that we want to do. It'd be cool if the prize like aligned with the holiday and the new year as well. We also have like another kind of cute campaign that we might start at 300, which we're excited to launch. So you can find KD Dayton at kddayton.com. You can find David Fisher at inthefirstplaceastrology.com, as well as in the About section for all of us. We're doing tutoring, readings, all those things. So yeah, I hope you all enjoy your solstice, enjoy your holiday time. We will be back starting Capricorn 1, but I just wanted to get that out with our little jovial, celebratory, winter space here in the Northern Hemisphere. And KD, would you like to take us out with the excerpt from T. Susan Chang, or the poem?
Absolutely. I'd love to. It seems to be a theme in these poems at the end of Sagittarius that we're talking about Shakespeare. So there's another Shakespeare snippet here. Act 3, Scene 1 from Hamlet. And this is Hamlet speaking. Who would fardels bear to groan and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no travelers return, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of.
Matao kako bersama yo demikian soba da soba kena matahi bang nakau mati mawa demikian soba and soba atai banake ujuna baikana kamaya ta ongai esa Okoyo Masena Matari Bekana Sabaso Inakina Tabaine Toyukas Imbayatona What the bike